Sam here for United People's TV, here with Simon Caney, editor of the Busby Years bookazine. And we're here, we've had a great little series of few chats. We've started off with a little prelude into the Busby Babes and how Sir Matt came around. Then we talked about the Munich air disaster. We had a little focus on Duncan Edwards, and then we looked at how this all came round to the 1968 European Cup final. Now this small little chat we have at the end here is the small because no one really wants to talk about it, is the 3 or 4 years that followed the glory of 68. I suppose you can't really blame them for going off a cliff edge because it was 10 years of build-up all to that point. Where do you go from there?
I think that's it, and I think this was, as we've said before, the realisation of what Busby wanted to do. And he knew that once he'd done it, that he was probably ready to step down. It was a team that was getting older. He'd kept them together for several years. And really the only player who was still young and getting better was George Best.
Yeah.
And the others, such as Bobby Charlton, were starting to...
But even George Best going towards the 71 season, it's when George Best has started to get some sort of issues with his attitude, and he wasn't the George Best of 68 only a few years later.
No, well, what I found really interesting putting this archive material together was actually how well he did play despite all of his issues. And yes, he was starting to have problems with alcohol. But in the, I think 71-72 season, when United were struggling, he scored 14 goals in the first 13 games. He was turning up to some games clearly sort of under the influence.
Even half-heartedly, he was still leading the league, wasn't he?
Absolutely, and you can understand why he became disillusioned himself. Because United didn't build on 68. They signed one player in Willie Morgan afterwards. But just allowed the team to grow old and decline, which is such a shame. And for George, I guess he could see it happening around him. He was carrying the team on his shoulders. More pressure for somebody like him who was starting to struggle with alcohol anyway. Yeah. The last thing he needed was more pressure, more spotlight. Yeah. And he was doing things like just fleeing the country, going off to Marbella for a few days. Just United didn't know where he was. And as I say in there, there's one thing, he could play pretty well when he turned up, smelling of booze from the night before. He could even play pretty well when he turned up drunk, but even George Best couldn't play well if he didn't turn up at all. Yeah, well, he's not got. You can't be a magician when you're a ghost, can you? Obviously, when Sir Matt Busby left, Wilf McGuinness came in, and it was a tumultuous period, I suppose. It was very difficult. You feel sorry for Wilf McGuinness because Busby still had an office and he had the manager's office and Wilf had a little corner room. And so working in the shadow...
That's awkward.
Working in the shadow of someone like Matt Busby, who's still got the big office, must be really difficult. And Wilf didn't last very long. United struggled. Franco Farrell came in and sort of had it out with Busby and said, I want the big office. But what nobody did, and no one did until Alex Ferguson, was actually pick Busby's brains and use him as a sounding board.
Which is a bit baffling when you think about it.
It's very difficult, I guess. He was such a presence, they wanted to try and stamp their own mark on it.
It doesn't mean you wouldn't have a chat with him.
No, you've got him there, absolutely. And in the interim period, Busby did take over again very briefly after McGuinness.
Yeah, obviously he helped us stop the rot basically, and I think we finished about 8th place that year after we came back in. Yeah.
But it was a period of decline that obviously led just a few years later to relegation. That's just 6 years.
That's a different story altogether that thankfully we are not going to be talking about.
No.
So to wrap up, this bookazine is you've read it before, you've seen it before, but this does it in a really nice format, very digestible format that you may not have seen before. It's a nice magazine. It's great colours, great photos. And it's just very easy to read and flick through because it's got so many beautiful photos, and I think that's a big focus of it. It's so visual. And the story, we could go on about it for years and years and years, and we will be. In 20 years' time, there won't be me and Simon. It won't be me and Simon talking about it. It'll be the younger generation of United fans who are still having this same conversation about how wonderful the Babes were and how beautiful the story is. Thank you for coming in, Simon. Thanks for having a chat. Thanks for the series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't, subscribe to United People's TV. share the video, leave your comments below. And thank you to Matt Busby for what he's did for Manchester United, and I'm sure people will be talking about this in 20, 30 years' time as well. See you later.
Hey! Pay attention to the manager.